from the
Recording in progress.
NRSV this morning. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead already for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you would always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they might believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. And so I have entitled this message, "Our Weepy Savior, Stumbling into Resurrection Hope." This is an interesting passage for All Saints' Day. Today we gather to honor the saints. And sometimes that freaks us out a little bit, not only because we're not too comfortable with death, but also because we don't really understand what is meant by the saints. Are they people who lived perfect lives? Are they people who only existed in a certain period of time? Are they people who only exist within the faith? We have all kinds of questions. And I like to think that this day is as broad as it can possibly be, that though there are denominations who elevate certain people, I think that we have the opportunity today to honor all of those who have gone before us, whatever that means. Those we have known and loved, those that we have had relationships with, those we have never known, those who exist in our lineage, those who we have never met but somehow still exist with us, inspiring our journey and giving us the power to be inspired by their example. Those that we call upon who have inspired our reading and our listening and our understanding. We join with all of them on this day. All of those who have strengthened our journey towards justice and love. This day is a sacred space to remember those who have gone before. It is more than a memorial. It is an invitation to pause, to enter into the fullness of our memories and grief, and to embrace the presence of those who are with us today. In our society, grief is often seen as an interruption thrown into the wrench of normal life and busyness, something to move past, something to quiet down. And today, we have the opportunity to resist that tendency, to make room for the presence of loss and love and how they linger together. By hollowing out this space, we acknowledge the holiness of memory, the way that our ancestors' stories are woven into our own stories day in and day out. They say the veil is very thin at this time of the year, but I think it's thin all of the time. I think that people always are available to us. We can just tap into what they have to teach us. And so in the spirit of All Saints, we let ourselves experience this time as sacred, trusting that even in the midst of sorrow, God honors that and meets us there. It might not surprise you that people often ask pastors, what do you think happens when we die? And it happens all the time, on the train, walking, when I meet people at parties, and I'm like, I'm here for the party. And so usually my first response to people is, I don't know, I've never died before. I can't really tell you about it. And it's true, because there's so much about it that is still a mystery, so much about it that we don't know. And honestly, my own vision of what comes after this life, whether it's really a place with golden streets or something far beyond human imagination, for me, it really shifts and evolves, sometimes daily. But there are a few foundational beliefs that I hold on to, even amidst that uncertainty. So yeah, usually I say, I've never died before, I don't know. But then after a while, we get to talking, and I begin to talk about resurrection hope, the most basic Christian belief that grounds all possibility. Resurrection hope is the belief that when we die, we are united with God, whatever that means, reminding us that death is not the end, but a passage, a portal into all of reality, where life continues on in some kind of way, perhaps more beautiful, more whole, more full than we could ever imagine. When I talk to people, I just say, I believe we come from dust and we return to dust, which is another sacred day on our calendar. I believe that we come from God and we return to God. And I believe that, like energy, spirits are things that cannot be destroyed. They just transform. And I believe that one day the things that burden us so much will no longer burden us anymore. And I believe that heaven is not really always this place that's far off or only for the future. It is here among us. It is a place where people are surrounding us all the time. This hope is that as we mourn and miss people, their lives, their existence remain interwoven into the fabric of our lives. Scripture has this way of talking about that, which talks about the cloud of witnesses. The cloud of witnesses, the communion of saints, these are things that we recite often, but it means this exact thing, that heaven is among us, that there are people with us and behind us, around us, guiding us and inspiring us to live with the same courage and faith that they did. In this sense, hope is not just about a future reunion, it's also about an ongoing communion with those who have gone before us. Somehow that they linger, that they bring strength, encouragement, reminding us of wisdom, because they messed up and they made mistakes and they did silly things, and we have the opportunity as people of faith to tap into somebody else who has done this before. And God gives us that peace. It assures us that those who come before us have remained present with us. It gives us strength to walk through grief, knowing that we are never truly separated, that in God's love, life endures, and so does our connection to all those who have ever lived before. And so that's a long way of saying that eventually we get to something like that. And our faith is rooted in this resurrection hope in some kind of way. Yet, as we see in the story of Lazarus, sometimes that hope feels more like a stumbling than a soaring. Sometimes we stumble because hope is not always a smooth, clear path. Sometimes we don't believe any of this, and that's a part of it. There is uncertainty, and there is heartache, and there is a vision that is clouded by sorrow. There are moments when our spirits feel heavy as we try to hope towards resurrection or whatever that means. Often it feels like a stumbling journey full of stops and starts and questions and the weight of grief. Hope can be a process of holding on through that uncertainty. One of the reasons why I love this story is because it reminds us that hope does not require the absence of pain. Jesus himself walks into this tension between hope and heartbreak, showing us that resurrection hope doesn't erase grief. It is something that holds it, walks with it, makes a space for it. Jesus' own tears reveal that hope and sorrow often coexist, allowing us to see that they can dwell together without contradiction. And so in those questions with people and conversations with people, I tell them a little something like that, but then I tell them, you might not believe that today, and that's what church is for. We believe these things together. We hold these things together so that some days you might not have it, but somebody else has it, and we hold it together. That's what community's for. And so in this passage from John, we encounter Jesus coming to the tomb of his friend Lazarus. Martha and Mary, both devastated by their brother's death, express the same grief, saying, "Lord, if you had been here, he would have never died." And so we sense their frustration, their resentment, their sorrow. After all, if Jesus loved this man so much, why did he take so long? Why was he walking so slow? Why was he allowing himself to be so distracted? Interestingly, though, while we know that the crowds were weeping and we know that the sisters are upset, we know the most detail about Jesus' emotion. Jesus arrives and is profoundly moved by their sorrow and the community's sorrow. The text says that he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. Phrases that signify a powerful, almost physical expression of sorrow. According to Working Preacher, they actually think that this translation is too weak. The first verb is not just a strong feeling, but it is more about the passion and pain that comes from being angry at something, a very strong kind of visceral feeling. And then they say that the second verb is tied to a stirring up of oneself on the insides. It signifies a deep kind of mental and internal disturbance that is almost akin to being physically ill, almost akin to being physically disturbed. And so the scholars argue we don't really have words that get at how strongly Jesus is feeling in this moment. You may have heard me say that in the past, also some of the words that talk about Jesus's being moved by compassion actually have to do with the bowels, because physical body itself is disturbed, and that's a similar thing that's happening here. So, and we see that Jesus is not just this distant observer. He's not stoic, he's not detached, he's fully present, he's fully embodied, he's fully visible. He enters fully into the moment, embodying divine compassion and human vulnerability. When he arrives at the scene, he openly weeps, allowing himself to feel the intensity of the moment, even though he knows that in a few minutes, Lazarus will live again. Jesus wept, even knowing how the story would end. And so we have to just pause there, knowing that for us who weep and don't have the knowledge and power that he has, that in his own weeping, he sanctifies all grief. of any kind. The weeping is a revelation of Jesus' deep empathy that he mourns with and for all of his friends, joining in the community's grief without bypassing or rushing towards a miracle. Don't worry, in a few minutes you're going to see him. He doesn't do any of that. He stops. And he lets the moment be what it is, which is terrible and awful. He doesn't say anything about the future or what's going to happen. He stops and let time slow down, and he honors the moment for what it is. In Jesus' tears, we see his willingness to enter into human suffering, fully bearing witness to the depths of sorrow that rightly come with the situation. His response challenges this image that we often want to have of these moments where we're reassuring the person, or we're telling them just keep going for the future, or we're trying to pull them quickly out of their feeling. But again, Jesus slows time down. He allows compassion and vulnerability to be a part of divine love. He demonstrates that grief and faith can coexist, that feeling is not a failure of faith, but a reflection of it. And so in Jesus' weeping and slowing down time, we find this permission to bring our whole selves to community. Our questions, our fears, our sadness, our fragile hope, our I'm sorry that sounds nice, but I can't really believe that right now. All of that to the table. Not needing to fix our hearts before we reach for the promise of resurrection. Instead, we are invited to stumble towards it, just as we are, trusting that this is not just a distant promise, but a tender present hope that meets us right where we are. I always think it's interesting that Jesus' tears also challenge our understanding of all kinds of things like masculinity and strength and what it means to be truly human. He undoes all of that in his time, much like ours. Men, especially leaders, are expected to stifle their emotions and display strength in a way that is stoic and not vulnerable. They're supposed to be the ones who swoop in and save the day and tell everybody, stop your whining because something's going to happen in a few minutes. And Jesus slows down time and allows himself to be a man who is openly weeping in front of the crowd, showing his heartbreak and compassion without shame. Now, some of the people may have scoffed at the crowd, but can you scoff at Jesus, who is doing the same? His tears are not a sign of weakness, but of empathy and love. He models for us a way of honoring this day and all days where grief and love are tied up together. By slowing down time, he reminds us that sorrow is not something to rush through or ignore. Even in telling the story, we rush to the end, like, look, what happened to Lazarus? How amazing. But we don't allow ourselves to sit with the middle of the passage, where time slows down and Jesus weeps loudly and visible and completely. His tears convey that remembering is something that is sacred. They are an invitation to let us bring ourselves before God without apology. And that even though in this passage Jesus is the one who brings life, it's not just because Lazarus is alive, it's because Jesus brings life because he does not shy away from the depth of the situation. Jesus is the one who brings life, whether Lazarus is alive or dead. He brings life in the fact that he enters into that moment and allows it to be holy. His presence and his willingness to pause teaches us to do the same. And so in a world that often shies away from the realities of pain and death, All Saints' Day stands right in the middle of our calendar as this reminder to embrace both of those things. It is something that goes against our very fast-paced society that's focused on production and busyness and distraction and doing all these things and moving past things, where mourning is rushed and minimized. All Saints' Day is one of those things that gives us the pause, that slows time down. It's a space in the year to stand beside Jesus at that tomb, to let our own tears and our own memories guide, to take a moment to remember all of those who have gone before us and listening to what they have to teach. Sometimes by what they did, sometimes by what they didn't do, sometimes by the brightness of their lives, sometimes by the dark moments of their lives when we say, I never want to do that. But we slow ourselves down and allow ourselves to move without being pressured to get over it or to move on. Jesus shows us that faith doesn't mean rushing past our pain, and resurrection hope doesn't mean rushing to the end. It is right there in the midst of that willingness to feel that is what transforms. This day reminds us that comfort is available, whether Lazarus is alive or not. Jesus doesn't merely raise Lazarus from the dead, he enters into the pain of loss. That even God is moved. And so by sharing with us, Jesus assures us that no darkness is too much for him to also enter into. And All Saints' Day is a time for us to remind ourselves that on both sides of the grave, Jesus' love and life persist. And so we stumble forward, sometimes clinging to resurrection hope with a lot of joy and certainty, but sometimes with a hazy view of sorrow, and that's also okay. But All Saints is about the fact that we do not walk alone. We remember those who also grieved, those who also held pain, those who also missed people when they were here. And we use their examples to be held steady and to be encouraged onward. And so we have this hope, not that everything's going to immediately occur, but that we are connected to one another, past and present, in a communion of faith and resilience. So yeah, people ask me this all the time, but the part that I think is most important is Jesus' own tears. And so let that be a comfort for us. Amen. And so now is your opportunity to share what might be bubbling up in you, ways that this message might be moving you, questions you have, wrestlings you have, things that are coming up.
Thank you, Brooke. Lots of things came to my mind. I thank you for saying that you believe that your view of heaven changes on a daily basis sometimes, because that's the way I felt all my life, that I've looked at it. I've listened to different preachers and different worship services, and they all have a different viewpoint of it sometimes, so your viewpoint changes. But to me, that passage is not about heaven. It's about what is happening right now on earth. Mm-hmm. And his tears are what keep me going. Because I believe many passages in the Bible talks about how God will always be there with us in all the tough times. And I can say for true that has been true in my life as I've looked past. In sorrow, and in hurts, in anger, resentment, whatever. I've always felt that God was there with me. So this passage about his tears makes me realize it doesn't matter what happens after death. It matters that I will have someone there with me.
Thank you, Judy. That was very beautiful. Yes, Peter.
Thank you, Brooke. Okay. Excuse me. Again for a very insightful sermon. I was thinking of Jewish woman philosopher named is Hannah Arendt, and she wrote a book which had a great influence on me and lots of other people as well. It was called Between Past and Future, and it's a book of essays. She had lived through the Holocaust. She was German, Jew, and the present is rapidly becoming the future, and the past is rapidly becoming the present. And so between past and future is the present, but it's always moving. and both anchors are always there. And I was thinking of the eschatological hope as being not something that is in the distant future, but it is present, and that the past out of which we have emerged is very close by. Almost that the present is something that cannot be grasped apart from the past and the future. And I was trying to think about all of that when you were throughout your sermon, and thinking that we do an injustice to time when we sort of think of the past as being distant and the future being distant, when both are present with us all the time. And the present is a mixture of the past and the future. And so those are thoughts that I had, and we'll continue to think of those.
It's very beautiful, yeah. Very fascinating to think about. Dizzying to think about.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ari. It's my first time here, my first time speaking. But as you were talking, as you were talking, I kept thinking about Hebrews 4:15, which is, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize and understand our weaknesses and temptations, but one who has been tempted, knowing exactly how it feels to be human in every respect as we are, yet without committing any sin." It just made me think about how, you were talking about how when Jesus arrived, he just wept with them, even though Jesus knew that he could and would fix that situation. And in true transparency, I'm having even though I have a lot of great things happening, I'm navigating grief in between them. And even though I know that this situation is only temporary, I find that instead of allowing myself to sit in my emotions right now, I'm jumping to fix them. Yet Jesus wants to sit with us. And sometimes speaking towards myself, I'm resistant to just allowing myself just sit in that and be comforted. Oftentimes, I know in my life, I think of well, God, why couldn't you just fix this? Or when are you going to fix this? Or this could have happened similarly to the sisters. And in that it's yeah, God may fix this. And sometimes the situation doesn't get fixed. Sometimes the fix is just letting it be and moving forward and accepting that. But how often do we allow ourselves to really just sit and rest in our emotions, to rest in the fact that above all that we do have a God, we do have a Christ that wants to just sit with us, that wants to be present, that, sometimes when you have that friend or that mom that's just talking to you or even father or whoever, that like they just run to fix you. And like, no, I just wanted you to sit with me.
Yeah.
And like, but do you offer that to yourself? You know, like in this moment, like,
that'll preach.
you know, it's like in this moment, it's like, okay, I woke up today, I'm like, I'm gonna walk. I already decided I'm going to church today for the first time in like a year and some change. I'm gonna do all these things. It's like, and then I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna work on that and work on this, and I'm thinking about all these problems. It's like, babe, just sit down. Like, just cry. You know, like feeling your emotions.
Yes.
Like sometimes that is the fix, because like you need that step, but we try to skip that step, even if we know that things are gonna get better. Even this week, I'm already prepared. Like, okay, maybe I shouldn't go to work on Wednesday. You know, maybe here are the things I should take. But it's like, girl, just grieve. Like, there is nothing wrong with just grieving and crying and not having a solution for that moment. You used to have a friend that would say, like, you know, you don't have to come with a solution. You could just come and say, I'm sad. You could just say, I'm not hearing this right now. And just thinking about, you know, Jesus just sat with them. He sat and he cried. He fixed it later. Like, just fix it later. You don't need to fix it right now. And we have a God that, like, I want to believe will fix it in its time. And everything, as I live, I realize, like, everything ends up working out some way or another. Even if it's not the outcome I wanted, it works out. It becomes, it just does. So, like, just cry. Just be. And clearly the message might just be for me, but it's for everyone in different forms.
No,
but
yeah, there's a lot of nodding heads.
Thanks. And I'm just sitting here and I'm just like,
Yeah.
girl, just cry. You know, he, she, they, whoever, just cry. It's okay.
Yeah.
So thank you for your message today. It was very timely.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Yeah, and if it helps you Wednesday morning, take it, right? Like, it's real. It's everything. And I think, again, like, even in how this passage gets preached, we always want to run to the end of the story. But the reality of the situation is Lazarus died again, right? Like, Jesus used this moment to teach people something, but he still died. He died again and is dead now. And so that wasn't the message of that story. The message of that story was that Jesus stopped. Right? And so even in the story and how we tell it, you know, we don't pause or recognize where the pause happens.
I wanted to bounce off of that and say I appreciated that so much, and it absolutely resonated. Something that I tell a lot of my friends is that the best thing they can do to support me is just hold my hand and sit with me while I solve whatever is going on in my life myself, which is something that a lot of them have found very challenging at times, because it feels like not being able to do anything for someone they love. It feels like being helpless, but just being able to sit with me and not do it alone is genuinely the most touching, beautiful thing that I'm grateful people have done for me. And it was something that was a skill for them to figure out, and it took a lot of time. And so I think it's very beautiful then, the idea that Jesus is like that kind of friend. And I very much agree and resonate with, we should be able to also be that kind of friend for ourselves and not just other people. And so I truly appreciated that.
I love that. Thank you, Theo and Ari. It's beautiful. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Jaden.
I know I haven't been here for a while, so thank you for all welcoming me again. But enough about my personal problems. But but anyway, when you were talking about how hope and sorrow can be one connected with each other, it really reminded me of one of my most favorite movies ever, The Prince of Egypt. And it reminded me of this one scene where Moses was talking to the Hebrews of how Ramesses would, no matter how hard he tried to convince Ramesses to let them go, he just refused. There was one thing that Moses said, saying to the Hebrews that he has all the power, that he can take away your daughters, your sons, your homes. He can even take away your very lives, but there's one thing that he can't take away from you, your faith. And that just really reminded me of that, since like they've been through so much pain and slavery for so many years, and like you really can't blame them for not like losing hope, because they've been praying for so long that to be released and be free from all this pain. And they feel like God is not hearing them. And then now that Moses has came by, like, they expect me, like why should I believe him now? Like, I've been like praying to him all these years. Why should I listen to him now? And it just took him so many years to convince that no matter how hard it gets, no matter how much pain you go through, like, you always have faith. As long as you have enough faith that you can get through anything.
Yeah, thank you. Connecting it to that movie, and yeah, hope being this sort of complicated thing, for sure. No matter what the experience is, personal grief, communal, societal grief, we certainly see that throughout the Bible. Yeah, it's not an easy fix. Any other thoughts, things coming up? All right. Anything on Zoom? Okay. All right. Well, thank you for engaging.